to take on every challenge. It's a very basic principle. The truth is, modern psychology is just really coming to terms with these ideas. But in Torah thought, this was always very basic and very obvious. That's why, from day one, when you read stories of Genesis, of Adam and Eve, and later of all the different characters and personalities in the Torah, you'll always see it's a given that the love they extend to their children is their responsibility. Even when it comes to Adam and Eve, for instance, you read the first time a child is born. So Adam and Eve are created, according to the story in Genesis, by God. The Medrash says they were 20 years old. They appeared as adults on this world, in this world. As the entire universe was an adult universe. So when they ask the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The Torah answer is, of course, both. There were chickens and eggs. Because if you were Adam or Eve standing in the Garden of Eden, what would you see? You just appeared. You wouldn't just see seeds in the ground. There were trees, and there were stars in heaven, which means, based on light years, the universe appeared to them as it could have been millions of light years, because the stars were shining. They were not just beginning to shine. Starlight was already reaching Earth. Trees have rings. So they saw full-bodied creatures. Means they saw a mature universe. At the same time, they also saw the universe in process of constant regeneration, meaning there were also seeds. So we have both chickens and eggs in that response. In general, if you want to know a Talmudic answer to any question, the answer is usually both. It depends on what level you're talking about. That's just a general overall. Something like Yogi Berra said, if I could quote him in the context of Torah, as he's a Torah sage, when they asked him, what do you do when you come to a fork in the road? And his answer is, you take it. Okay? So it means you do everything. You try all the options. It doesn't always work that way, but you get the idea. So, that being said, Adam and Eve came in as adults. So where do we have the first children being born? You have, of course, Cain and Abel. Now, that story doesn't end up being such a great story then, so I'm not really addressing that part. But I want to address one point. It says, interesting statement, that Adam and Eve, of course, ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Eitz Hadas, Tev, even though they were forbidden to eat. Just as another footnote, since we're doing a little trivia here, most people think it was an apple, right? Adam's apple is the expression. The forbidden apple. It's not accurate. According to the Torah, there's no opinion that holds it was an apple. There are four opinions, actually, what kind of tree the knowledge was. One opinion was an esrog, a citron, the esrog that we take on Sukkot. A second opinion was that it was grapes. It was a grapevine. The third opinion, figs, a fig tree. And the fourth opinion was that it was a rimon, a pomegranate tree. I believe those are the four. No, I'm sorry, not rimon. No, strike that. With the recording going, we have to fix it. But a wheat stalk, wheat. Yeah, those are the four opinions, and each have their sources, because the Torah itself doesn't say what kind of tree it was. It just says it was a tree of knowledge, tree of life, tree of knowledge, and each have their own opinion. But none of them is an apple. And I always wondered where that myth came from. And actually, I think it came from some distorted translation into Latin by other than rabbinic scholars. And you could guess yourself who that is. Based on a Tosfos. Tosfos is a commentary on the Talmud that says Kimin Tapuach Choya, that the tree was Kimin Tapuach, which in Hebrew means like an apple. But anyone that knows Hebrew knows Kimin Tapuach is not a tapuach. Tapuach would be a tree, an apple. When you say Kimin Tapuach, it means it looks like an apple. It's like similar to an apple. And that's the opinion that is the esrog, which has a certain shape like an apple. So anyone not really fully understanding the word Kimin Tapuach, being fluent in Hebrew, would misinterpret that as being an apple. Anyway, there you go. If you want to use that on your next date or something to show that you know something, you could use that. It's not my wisdom. It's just that I dug it up. I don't know what Google will offer you, but we could try. So I'm searching tonight. Tree of knowledge. What kind of tree was it? Let's see what it comes up with. So that's not the theme of this evening's discussion. The theme was, the point I was making was that Adam and Eve, after eating from the tree of knowledge, so the Torah goes on, and this is one of the most profound verses, what happens next, the consequences. Now why is this so important? Because consequences always tell you, in the Torah, everything is cause and effect. And just as it is in medicine, or in any process of healing, one of the best ways to discover when something happens are the consequences. That's how science actually discovers things. We look at consequences. We look at the results. Because we were not there when it originally happened. When you see the results, you can retrace the steps to the cause. So in Torah, when you talk about effects, it always teaches you what the cause was like. So the concept of reward and punishment in general in the Torah, as I explained last week and many times here, is misinterpreted. Really, reward and punishment, all it is cause and effect. Like when you put your hand in fire, it's not that the fire or nature is punishing you or God is punishing you for putting your hand in fire by burning you. It's part of the cause and effect. So what was the effect of the eating from the tree of knowledge? So one of the effects, it says there, that Adam would have to, from here on, no longer be provided for income. He would have to struggle. From that moment on was born, basically, economic strife. So if you want to trace the problems of the economy today, you can go all the way back to the tree of knowledge. Adam, Zeyes apecha teicha lechem, from the sweat of your brow you shall eat your bread. Whereas before, Adam could have spent his time meditating, praying, studying, connecting to God. Spirituality would have been his predominant preoccupation. From here on, now you have to struggle for your means. And when you struggle with your means, obviously it's going to take time, and it's going to take sweat, in many more ways than one, and you'll have much less time for the end. What happened later, which is another discussion, is that this became an end in itself, the struggle for a living. But in truth, it was always meant to be a means, but this means now became a dominant force in his life. What happened to Eve? So the Torah also says, from here on, you shall give birth in pain. Birth pain. In other words, prior to eating from the tree of knowledge, birth would come easy, natural, smooth. And from here on, it will come with pain. You'll struggle, both in pregnancy and at birth. And then there's also the third consequence that happens to the serpent, which is not our issue this evening. But what's very fascinating here is, well, since I already mentioned Adam, I'll just give you a brief point here, but I'm discussing love. What's interesting is why, of all things, is Eve's punishment, Eve's consequence, effect, from eating from the tree of knowledge, that she suddenly will have birth pain. What's one thing have to do with the next? Why is it connected to birth, to children, and so on? Because really, in the broader sense, birth pain is not just the pain of giving birth, it's also the pain of bringing up children. And all the tzar gidl bonim, as they say. With all the beauty and love, it also is challenging. It doesn't come easy. Which is really a strange thing, because what's the most natural thing in life is giving birth to children and the next generation. It should be the thing that's the easiest, the smoothest. Why did God make it in a way that it would come with difficulty? The same question, of course, can be applied to Adam and why he was punished with working. But it all comes down to one thing. Eating from the tree of knowledge was no simple matter. It was not just like they ate from the tree of knowledge and God suddenly decided, okay, I'll punish you. It goes back to what really was going on here. Hello. Welcome. You're one of the pillars. And the story goes like this. The way it's explained in mysticism, Kabbalistic writings and Hasidic teachings, is that before the tree of knowledge, which is a watershed moment in history, there was a seamlessness that essentially dominated life. And that seamlessness was essentially that there was no dichotomy between who you are and what you do, between your soul and your body, between matter and spirit, between the purpose of things and the way you achieve that purpose. So Adam and Eve, as it says in the Torah, were not ashamed of their sexuality. That's why they were not conscious of their nudity. One of the things the Torah says, when they ate from the tree of knowledge, their eyes were opened, and suddenly they were ashamed. And they covered themselves. What about before? What changed? The answer is before their consciousness was as seamless as a child's. Not naive, and not stupid, and not narrow, but on the contrary, pure, innocent. Just like the rest of a human being is one extension of the soul, so too sexuality is connected to the divine, and there was no reason to be ashamed of it. Newborn children are not conscious of their sexuality because there's nothing wrong with sexuality. It's we adults that impose that self-consciousness or attitude, so to speak, that turns it into a whole complicated thing. Why? Because we have egos. And once you have egos, you have agendas. And when you have agendas, you're conscious of your agenda. And sexuality, of course, takes up a very big part of that. So Adam and Eve, when they ate from the tree of knowledge, what changed was a state of consciousness change. They became conscious of themselves. As soon as you're conscious of yourself, all the problems begin. Now, we usually like to think of being conscious as being like healthy. Oh, this person is conscious of what's going on, and this one's not conscious. It actually is not so healthy, to be very honest. Think about health. If you're conscious of your health, you're usually not in good shape. What I mean by that, not I don't mean conscious about being sensitive to your health. I mean, if you feel your health, if you're conscious in the sense that there's some sensation. What does health feel like? Can anybody describe what health feels like? So if you told it to a doctor, as soon as you feel it, it means you need a doctor. What means, how do you feel health? Because health is supposed to be invisible. It just flows. What does it feel like when your circulation is good? It shouldn't feel like anything. It should be so smooth you don't feel it. The same thing with anything else. If you feel anything, that means there's a problem, there's a block, there's a impediment. Something is not functioning properly. In a smooth flowing machine, it is so seamless that nothing is felt. So that type of thing called I'm conscious of it is actually a sign that there's two worlds. There's you, what we call the subject and the object. There's you and what you're conscious of. So prior to the tree of knowledge, eating from the tree of knowledge, there was this seamlessness. Which is why God says to Adam afterwards, Ayeko, where are you? God didn't know where Adam was. He was hiding. Obviously, he wasn't talking about physically where are you. You ever talk to somebody and they space out and you ask, where are you? You don't mean, you see where they are. They're sitting right across the table. Where are you is like, where's your spirit? You left me. You're not with me anymore, so to speak. Your spirit's not there. Your mind is somewhere else. Your heart is somewhere else. So, where are you? God was saying is, I don't recognize you any longer. You were once a seamless, non-conscious creature where everything about you was connected to something higher. And now there's you and there's your experiences. Yes, some of them are very pure and holy experiences, but some of them are not. So ego per se is not the issue here. It's ego when it's divorced from higher purpose. Put it in simple terms. I don't know if those are simple terms, but at least in the concrete terms. So, with that being said, this is what happened when they ate from the tree of knowledge. And therefore it impacted both Adam and Eve accordingly. Adam it impacted in a simple way. Oh, now you're your own agenda? So then now you struggle for making your own living. I'm not going to provide it for you. It's not going to come easily. By the sweat of your brow, you struggle for a living because now you've separated between the means and the ends, between body and soul. Had you been seamless and pure, I would have provided for you the resources to live your life, and you would have spiritualized it and could have occupied most of your life in the spirituality of things instead of struggling with the material. Now that you've become so-called a whole entity of your own, so now you struggle. And now you're going to have to find a way to reconnect your so-called your spirituality and your material part, or your sexuality and your more sublime nature. That's going to be a struggle. And with Eve, the same is true. Eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in her intentions may have been, you know what, I will teach my children good and evil. How will they know what good and evil is? And God's response was essentially, good and evil in a healthy environment doesn't have to be taught. You sense it. Healthy people sense when something's inappropriate. You don't have to teach it to them. It's only in a world where there is evil and selfishness, that's when you have to teach people things. But think of it this way. It says when Mashiach comes, when seamlessness will be reclaimed, innocence will be revisited. So it says there will be a world where we will not need to be told that something is right or something is wrong. For instance, right now, even in the world in which we live today, no one has to tell you when you're hungry. You don't need to open up a book and say, oh, it says I'm hungry and I better eat. Your body tells you. And same thing with fatigue. But when it comes to right and wrong, or comes to spiritual things, there you need to open up a book. Why? Why don't you instinctively know what's good for you, what's not good for you? Because we're out of touch with what is good and what is not good for us. We have become callous, insensitive. We've become conscious of ourselves, and our agendas sometimes conflict with the higher good. So you have to be taught. You have to open up a Chumash, a Shulchan Aruch, a book of ethics that teach you this is right, this is wrong. But in a very healthy environment, it should be as instinctive as your body feels when it's hungry and your body feels when it's tired. So basically, what happened with Eve was, you're no longer in touch naturally with what love is all about. So now, you want to bring a child into this world, you're going to pay a price. You've now separated yourself. Had you been connected and had it been seamless, then the birth process would also have been seamless and painless. Now it's a struggle. So it wasn't the pain that was the intention. The point was, there are two worlds. And whenever there's two worlds, there's a difficulty of bridging them. That's, you can say, if you want a summary of human struggle, it's all about bridging conflicting universes, bridging conflicting feelings, what our mind says, what our heart says, what people around us put pressure on and want from us, what our inner feelings and instincts tell us. And you go on, every conflict, every psychological, emotional, personal conflict comes down to, what does conflict imply? Different forces tugging at us, or else there wouldn't be a conflict. When there's seamlessness, when there's unity, Hashem Echad, the ultimate prayer in Judaism, Shema, Hashem Echad, is seamlessness basically. It's one reality that just flows through different channels, but it's one cohesive whole. When you hear a piece of music, it can be an hour composition, 2 hours, but if it's presented, if it's composed and it's delivered properly, you won't hear any hitch. You'll hear a smooth story. You'll hear a fluid motion. But if somewhere there's a hitch, somewhere there's something wrong, you're going to suddenly, it'll jump out at you like that note doesn't belong. Or one note was too long, one was too short. What happens is it changes the whole dynamic. So when things are flowing smoothly, I would say smoothing slowly, but no, flowing smoothly, you don't feel it. It's just there. That's why you'll find the happiest people in this world cannot really identify what happiness is, because happiness is not a verb, it's a noun, it's a state of being, it's not an action. But when you're an unhappy person, you're looking for the thing that will stimulate happiness inside of you. It doesn't work that way. What does it feel like to see the world? Tell me. You're a seeing person. Explain to a blind person, God forbid, what does it mean to see the world? It's impossible to really describe. I mean, you could describe what you see, but the process of seeing is as smooth as it gets. It's just, you open your eyes and you see something. So everything that is really real, you can say, and pure, doesn't take any effort. There's nothing there. There's no two worlds. It's just one seamless flow. So Eve lost touch with that. So now, bearing a child, which is the most beautiful thing possible, creating a new life, bringing a new life into this world, now it's going to come with a struggle. And the struggle is meant to be a wake-up call. Don't take for granted that you know what you're doing with your children. You're going to have to pay attention. You have to be conscientious and sensitive to make sure to give your children a nurturing environment. It's not going to just come naturally, because this world is been split off from its higher purpose. And that is a result of that watershed event called Chet Eitzadas. So even though it's like seemingly a one small little episode in the Bible, it happens to be the biggest event of all, and that's why it's the first major event. After the creation, what's the first major event? Is this what we call the fall? Judaism doesn't call it the fall of man. Judaism calls it the split of man, meaning the dichotomy was born. In Kabbalistic terminology, it's a direct consequence of what we call the great Tzimtzum that I've discussed and written about. Some of you may be familiar that Tzimtzum is the Arizal's way of explaining this dichotomy, the dichotomy of two realities, where one is concealed from the next. So here we have a duplicitous world, a world of duality, where you can meet people and you don't see what you get, basically. person can smile to you and then stab you in the back. Even within ourselves, we have constant conflicts. Seamlessness is very, very elusive. And as you'll see from this discussion, love and seamlessness are all the same thing. So you could put it this way. When Adam and Eve, at the beginning of creation, really, the whole world was consumed with love. And here's the interesting thing. In Jewish thought, everything is thought of in terms of microcosm, macrocosm. An expression called Olam Katan Zeh Adam, which means a human being is a small universe. That's not just a nice statement. It happens to have real profound implications. It means that you and I contain, like a hologram, everything in existence, in miniature, in microcosm. Which, of course, one of the implications of that is that our behavior is not just isolated and local to you, it affects the entire universe, and vice versa. It may be subtle, and we don't feel it, but you and I, every one of us, contains everything within it. Everything is everything, basically. Except in, as I said, a microcosmic form. So, in that sense, when the Bible talks about history in general, that history plays itself out also in our lives. In a way, if you think of the Torah in that context, think of Genesis, the beginning of the Torah, as being the beginning of your life, and my life. And the end of the Bible is essentially the end of our lives. And everything in between are stages and cycles that we will go through in our lifetimes. So look at this interesting thing. It says that when beginning, Bereshis bara Elokim, God created heaven and earth. So you read the verses, it says that first God creates light, and then day 2, God separates the higher waters from the lower waters. What does this mean? As most verses there are very cryptic. It means the universe was completely covered in water, submerged in water. There was no land. I mean, there was land, but it was submerged in water. There was no water and land as we know it. And that took a particular effort. As the Medrash spells it out, Mayim b'mayim, everything was submerged in water. And how do we begin our lives, as I began this class? Also for 9 months submerged in water. In the womb. So the universe and the mini-universe, meaning the human being, all begin the same way, submerged in water. The question is why? Why do we have to begin that way? Both in the universal, on the global level, and on a personal level. Why? God could have created it anyway. He could have made it that's it. A seed is fertilized, conceived, and a person is born within a few minutes. There are creatures that don't go through an entire the gestation process. And the same thing with the universe. What's the point? Why create this situation of 9 months in the womb? So doctors, medicine, and science has its theories. The Torah, being also based on the fact that God could have done it in a different way, explains it in a very beautiful, and I would say poetic, eloquent way. Is because before we're going to be faced with the challenges of a dichotomous world, God wanted to give us a head start. And that head start is for you to be completely submerged in a seamless universe before you enter the real hostile universe. So to put it in the terms of, let's use a little mystical terminology, or I don't know if it's mystical, spiritual terminology, a soul on its own hovers in spiritual realms. Which means not really, as we can understand it, time and space as we know it. Souls are everywhere, in that sense. Like electricity, in a sense, is everywhere. And then when a time comes that a soul is chosen to come down to this earth, the word is come down. What it means to come down? It doesn't mean physically come down from a mountain. It's a metaphorical term of a transition from a higher state to a lower state. From a higher state of consciousness and awareness to a state where it will be confined in the human body. I mean, just to illustrate the point, I'll just use the analogy that I often use. It's actually not birth, it's the opposite of birth, but it's the same idea. When people ask the question, like, where does the soul go to after a person dies? You hear this question all the time, from children, from adults. We all ask this question. Where does the soul go? And the truth is, and this is what I always answer, the question is based on a very arrogant assumption that we are where it's at, so we're asking where the soul goes to, as if like
if it's no longer with us in this stage, where does it go? But let's use I guess, call it the gallows humor type of analogy of an appliance, an imaginary dialogue between an appliance and electricity. Since it's the hot season, air conditioner and electricity. So the air conditioner says to electricity, just bear with me, use your not physically. It says to the electricity, where do you go when they pull the plug? My plug, basically. So electricity says to the air conditioner, what do you mean where I go? I go back to where I always was. And what do you mean where'd you come from? They just invented you 100 or 200 years ago, this box, and they figured out technologically how to draw in hot air, humid air, so-called drain it from its moisture, and spit it back out as cool air. Or however air conditioners work. Okay? And this is your little box, and now you're asking me where I go to. I was here long before you were ever invented. And then in some way you figured out how to generate electricity, contain me in this box for a little while, and then you have the nerve to ask me, the chutzpah to ask me, that after they pull the plug, where I go? You're a newcomer, and just very on the scene and very contained. I've been contained in your box, and now you think that that's all there is. From your narrow perspective, obviously you think that anything that exists that nothing exists outside of your box. You got to think out of the box, basically. The electricity tells the box. Now we can relate to it because we're people who also can think out of the box because we understand that concept. So where does the soul go to? If electricity, which is only is a physical force, soul is a spiritual force, it doesn't go anywhere. It just goes back. It's no longer confined in the box called the body. Simple as that. I don't know if it's simple. It's hard for us to relate to it because we think in spatial terms. We think in very physical time and space. And it takes time for us to assimilate and train ourselves to think in abstract terms. Even the word abstract for us is somewhat disorienting. But the truth is it's not abstract. It's just another reality that we don't relate to. So we call it abstract. It's like they say about technology. Technology is everything that was invented after you were born. That's all it is. So in that sense, if you think of it now, go back to birth, the soul is in its so-called spiritual realm. And there's much discussed about it in literature, especially in the mystical, Hasidic, and Kabbalistic literature. And when you read it, it's fascinating, not just because it's intriguing, because it puts you in that place. When you read it, you start realizing that's where reality really dwells. And this box that we live in, which is called our bodies and the world in which we live in, is really a very narrow, myopic perspective. And this is what's called broadening your horizons. You start seeing a bigger picture. So the way it's discussed is that this soul, which is in a sense boundless, it has its structure. Every soul is different. But its structure is not bound by time and space as we know. Its structure is bound by spiritual time and space. So there are souls from chesed, loving souls that come from the branch called love. And there are souls that come from gevura, the branch called discipline. There are actually 7 branches on the menorah, and there are 7 branches of souls. So think of it of different branches on a tree. So souls also have personalities and have different strengths and different resources and different missions. But that difference is far different than the differences as we know them in the physical realm. So a soul is taken from its so-called non-box type of world, spiritual environment, and said, now the time has come for you to enter a box. And that box is called a body. And that box is called a physical universe. But because this journey is both traumatic and difficult, so it says, Masbir Nesei. God says, I will not just prepare you, I will feed you. I will nourish you and give you the strength to be able to deal with this transition. Because once you enter this box, you're going to forget where you came from. And when you forget, it's going to be very difficult. But you'll always remember there's something, and you can always be looking for something, which is really the root of all our search. It's looking for something that we either feel lost, or we feel is there somewhere, but we can't place our finger on it. This is the search that people are on. Some of us are more aware of the search, some of us are less aware. Some of us get so distracted with the box
that we stop searching altogether until something happens in our lives. And then you wake up and then something tells you there's something more than this box. So the soul comes down through a very difficult, traumatic journey. And it's called a journey. You read this on Neshama Beguf. And as it comes into this universe, it's prepared. God did not want to do it in a jolting, extreme way. So we come in first into our mother's womb and submerged in water. Water is symbolic of knowledge. Mei Hadas HaTorah is the expression, the pure waters of knowledge. And actually, interestingly, when the Messianic times, which I referred to earlier, when the universe will return to its innocence, it also says in the book of Isaiah, what does it say? Kimola Aretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Layom Mechasim. The world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Similar to the way it was in the beginning, in the Genesis. Because water symbolizes love, and water symbolizes unity, and water symbolizes seamlessness. When something is submerged in water, it's not about you, it's about the water that you're submerged in. Fish are considered to be the purest of species. The only ones that were not destroyed in the Great Flood. Because even though all the other animals were corrupted through human behavior, humans can corrupt animals. Fish could not be. Fish in Jewish law do not need shechita. They do not need to be slaughtered as animals, the shechita process. Fish are considered to be the purest of creatures. And in the mystical realm, in the mystical vocabulary, fish of the sea are like the creatures of the hidden worlds. Because anything submerged in the life source and is always aware of its life source is like Adam and Eve before they ate from the tree of knowledge, basically. So we begin our lives connected to our source, and it's only after 9 months that we emerge from there. It's really meant to be a preparatory stage before you enter the next stage of your life. And as I mentioned earlier, when things go well, our parents should be continuing that seamlessness, and if they were completely healthy, they would continue. They wouldn't quite submerge a baby in water all the time. That's not what's meant to be, but they would submerge a child in complete love. Because as much love as you give a child, we all know we'll need it later when we start discovering a world that's not so loving, a world that's selfish, where people with their own agendas, self-interest begins to dominate. This, of course, amplifies the tragedy of dysfunctional homes, broken homes, when children don't get that. Because then, suddenly, their lives are aborted in a certain way. Not physically, but the flow of love, the flow of water, the flow of everything that's supposed to be coming from parents, when that stops prematurely, or in some way is limited, it has to have an impact on the psychological development of the child. Basically, you can put it in a simple formula, if you like, as brutal as it sounds, that our level of security and insecurity, of self-confidence or lack of self-confidence as adults, is in direct proportion of what kind of love we received, unconditional love in our earliest formative years. That doesn't mean it's the only factor, but it's a major factor. And don't ever underestimate it. Because what a child is receiving in the womb and then in the early formative years, what it should be receiving is the constant reassurance that as difficult as this world is, you are indispensable, you're significant, you were sent here, you're not negligible. Once you have that and you're armed with that and you go through your earlier years and let's say your teen years, and then you enter the world and you suddenly realize, oh, this is not such a pure world as I thought it was, but you're armed because you have all that within you. Imagine if you don't have it, and then you suddenly face a world like that. Then you start questioning yourself, self-doubt, maybe it's me, and then you are really subject to the forces around you with little protection. And though each of our stories in this room and every human being on this earth is different, but more or less you can apply this formula to wherever you are. Every one of us can. It's just a question of extent, extreme, maybe different characters, different people, different environments, but the story of love or the lack of love is a very similar one that we all deal with. So the first thing we should all reassure ourselves is that no one of us got all that we needed, that's for sure. The question is how much oxygen was deprived. That's the real question.
And one of the ways you know it is from how you play out your life today. As I said before, and that's why I mentioned it, cause and effect. You may not know the causes that cause your problems in your life, but you know the effects in how you live your life. Without a question, how you love or how you don't love, how you are in relationships, basically, is going to be the first expression of what happened to you earlier in your life. There's no question about that. We may not like to hear that, and we may run from it, because nobody wants to hear, nobody likes to go to the causes. We like quick fixes. So now let's move the clock forward. We're adults, so-called adults, chronological adults, in an adult world. And we are looking for relationships. At some point, we look for a relationship. We look for someone that we can connect with. So yes, I should qualify relationships themselves as many levels. When we're in school and in kindergarten, we also have relationships. Those relationships are actually very significant at that stage in life. Though later it may not be as important, but at that stage, how you begin to bond or connect to friends is also very reflective of what happened to you in your childhood, in your home, and also will help develop your confidence, because as you begin to work with strangers, meaning going to school with friends and learning how to deal with them, will also shape how you will be later on. But when I mean relationships, obviously I mean the more called complicated relationship. I don't like that word, but that's the word everybody uses, complex relationships. On Facebook, I think half of people say relationship status complex, something like that. That's like a line everybody seems to be using. It's complicated, whatever that means. So now we are, this too, I don't want to, it's like, I was taught to be thorough, but the fact is you just can't cover every base when you're talking about a subject like this, but I have to just qualify a few things. Relationships. The truth is we're thrown into relationships long before we're ready for it. Right? So you go into high school, or let's call it puberty, when you begin to develop your sexual identity. So, in conventional scenario, I have to add that. So men are attracted to, boys are attracted to girls, and girls are attracted to boys. Or however people put those words. Not always, those same words will be used, other words may be used. I just don't want to get caught on any word here that someone says it's not exactly like that, But let's put it this way, sexual attraction begins. And it usually begins, whether it's, and I'm talking in a healthy situation, not, God forbid, where there's abuse or predators or anything like that. So it's usually the early teens, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now obviously we're not prepared for it, but we live in a very open sexual environment. So most of us are thrown into sexual relationships long before we're ready. That's another discussion which I really don't want to go into because I simply don't have the time right now. It deserves its own. I was talking about love, and I want to stick to the topic of love. But it needs to be added because the fact is we all gone through that stage. Nobody skipped teen years. We all went through it. And no matter what environment, whether you grew up in a more religious environment where there was segregated education, fine. That doesn't mean you don't have a sexual identity. It could mean that you have one and you don't know what to do with it. Or it's not developed, or whatever it may be. But the sexual identity begins to emerge. Unfortunately, we don't have enough educated and sensitive people who are teaching us anything. I'm not necessarily advocating sex education, but at least some type of reassurance or some type of validation as we go through the teen years, the confusing years, and we know nothing. It's again another discussion. So that's not how we go further. See, whatever relation, whatever happened then, hopefully one gets through that minefield. I can't say unscathed, but relatively, I can't even say relatively intact. But let's say whatever you want to say. You use whatever word you want to. Fill in the gap. You're now 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and as I just described, the whole lifetime has passed. 9 months in your mother's womb, okay, that more or less is covered because even unhealthy mothers, the way God made it was, in the womb, unless they're taking drugs or alcohol, the child is more or less protected from even the most dysfunctional mother, okay, and father. Then the early formative years is first minefield. Then come this first early school years and the teen years. So now you're an adult sitting in this room, right? And we're all beyond that age, right?